Do you know what I realized? I start every episode with "Here we go," or like most of the episodes with "Here we go," and I was just about to say it, and then I thought I shouldn't. I need to come up with a new entry line, and so I've just pointed out. It's like our cold open on a podcast. I was trying to think what to say.
Well, everyone needs a catchphrase, so that's perfect.
I know.
I like that one.
I realize mine is I highly recommend it because I say it about this and I say it about like life and TV or films and stuff like that. And I've just become really aware of this. And so whenever I say it, I'm like, oh, Steph, it's not even a good catchphrase. I need to come up with a better catchphrase.
Well, once you have the catchphrase, then you can start making the merch, Steph. So that's
exactly.
That's how you.
Oh yeah, talking about this. I'm wearing a females equal future. You can't see the bottom bit for International Women's Day that was on Tuesday. So shout out to that. Imagine if I had our own merch. I would like a merch of like, I'm pointing at the screen like a round of our logos, of our like little Bitmojis. Just a t-shirt with my Bitmoji face on it. would be great. Okay. Also, it feels like it sounds like we don't know we're recording. I do know we're recording. We're just having a chat. Okay. All right. Let's get into the actual show. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Stephanie Gooch, and I am a commercial architect at AWS. Been here for almost 2 years now. It's coming up. I need to check when my actual 2-year date is, but loving every minute of it. And today with me is John. He's back again. Nice to be back on the show, John.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm John Massey, and also on the optics team working as a commercial architect.
Perfect. So we are talking about snapshots today. Really interesting. I'm saying it like it's a cliche. It's a really interesting subject. It's not something you maybe don't think of that much when it comes to high cost. You probably don't notice it. It's mixed in with that EC2 other in your cost explorer, so you might not be thinking, oh, I need to fix that problem, but it is something that, especially John, when I first started here, John very much mentored me on how you look at snapshots in a very different way, and I definitely kind of schooled me on what I thought I was doing at my old job when I was trying to save money on them and clearly wasn't doing it right. And so he's kind of taught me a lot about this. So we're going to go over what they are. This is going to be the kind of basics episode. So we're going to talk about what they are, when to use them, how to save, and how to kind of simplify, because they can get quite complicated. And then in a couple of weeks' time, we have someone from the Snapshot team coming on to talk about some of the new releases from reInvent. But John, I know you wanted to showcase something before we get started.
Yes, I brought a prop this week for my appearance on the show, and when I was younger, my dad and I used to love, nerding out and, doing computer stuff. So I have this that we found. It's a 1991 issue of PC World magazine. And the cool part about this is like going back and just looking at the prices, the $30,000 desktop computers. And I looked at the hard drive prices in this, and there's a 105 megabyte hard drive in here for $900. So we're talking about $9,000 per gigabyte. And we wanted to bring that up because we're talking about snapshots, and there's a lot of inherent efficiency with those. When we talk about storing snapshots, it's a good way to reduce EBS cost. We can store snapshots for about $0.05 per gigabyte within AWS, and we've just introduced in new Snapshot Archive capabilities that drop that down to a little bit more than $0.01 per gigabyte. So going from 9,000 a gigabyte to a little bit more than $0.01, it's it's wild.
Do you know what's even wilder? that magazine's older than me.
I can't believe it's still hanging around. That tells you a little bit about
the fact that you've kept it. You've like moved out of your like parents' house. You've like moved in general as you're an adult, and this is still stuck around. Maybe I should get people to bring on props all the time. I like this.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people have. I definitely don't have any really old magazines. Maybe I could find an Argos magazine if anyone knows what an Argos. Any of the Europe listeners might know what Argos is. Okay, so let's get into it. So snapshots. Do you want to kind of explain the basis of what a snapshot is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the snapshots are really a secondary copy of your EBS data. And what happens there is we create a snapshot of EBS volume that we have, and what it does is it does create that block for block secondary copy that's stored on S3. So we basically create like a full copy of that. And then any subsequent snapshots, we're just capturing the incremental changes. So only based on what data is actually changed in the volume is what you're going to get billed for subsequently from there after we create that master copy. So it's a great way to be able to create multiple restore points. I can roll back data, have a lot of different points in time, and store that, really, really efficiently, or make copies of my volumes. A lot of different use cases that we'll talk through here for using those snapshots.
And maybe also, because I forgot to say, if anyone has any questions about comments about snapshots, please always feel free to put them in the chat. And if you're watching this later and you're watching on YouTube, then subscribe, like, all that normal stuff that you see YouTubers say. But also feel free to put questions on there because we can see. And you can always email us any questions you have at customization@amazon.com. Sorry, just before I forget. So with the snapshots, can you, as well, maybe for viewers who aren't hands on keyboards as much of the time, could you describe it in a way that's kind of like in layman's terms as well?
Sure. Yeah. So think about snapshots as basically being, a duplicate copy of our volumes that we can use for rollback purposes. Okay. Maybe think about if you use like Time Machine on your MacBook for, backing up your computer and having those rollback points. It's kind of like that.
I didn't know this, I think, with Time Machine on my Mac. So the fact that you said Time Machine, I was like, oh, this is a nerdy example I could get behind. You can't see my Dot 2 thing.
Time to bag it up.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about Lineage with snapshots. Give a bit of an explanation of what that word even means and how you'd use it.
Yeah, and this is a really important part when we start talking about, like the efficiency of snapshots. It speaks to the benefits of them, but also one of the areas where, folks look a little bit more closely to optimize. So when we're talking about the Lineage, we create that first master golden copy on S3, and then the subsequent copies we have are just the changes that have happened after that. So, I've got a 100 gigabyte volume. Create, my first initial snapshot. That 100 gigs is copied and stored on S3 behind the scenes in AWS. And then I, add in 5 gigabytes worth of data. I take another snapshot, and those 5 gigabytes move back over. And you can think about it as like a chain of different points in time that we have. And each one of those points in time will have some percentage of, unique blocks that are stored with it. And if you think about that just conceptually, that's the lineage that we have, based off of that underlying branch of data that we have.
Mm-hmm. And then how does that work with pricing?
Yeah, so you're charged per gigabyte based on the stored capacity that we have, which is just the incrementals. So if I've got that 100 gigabyte volume and I snapshot it, every day for a week, I've got 7 copies of it. I'm not paying for 7 full copies of the volume. I'm paying for first copy, and then just whatever the changes were each time I took the snapshot. So when we look at that, kind of cost that we're paying for the snapshots in the environment, I've got a lot of different kind of full virtual copies of my data based on different points in time, but I'm only paying for kind of a fractional percentage of that, like kind of full footprint that we have.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I didn't, when I first started thinking about snapshots, I didn't really take into consideration. I just saw hundreds of snapshots and assumed that I was spending like number times gigabyte of snapshot, but it wasn't the whole snapshot. It's just the changes. And so that can be quite tricky to identify which is the most expensive ones, which are the ones you're actually paying for. It kind of gets into the weeds a bit more. And I think that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. So is there anything else? Oh, we wanted to cover, so we can either talk about that now, or we can talk about data lifecycle management. What would you rather do?
Yeah. So I think there's maybe like 2 pieces that tie back over to the Lineage. We can talk about both of those right now. And one of them is the new feature that we have for the Snapshot Archive. What the Snapshot Archive capability lets us do is basically reduce the snapshot cost by up to 75% by storing that in an archive class. And this means that there's a 90-day minimum retention for that, and we pay a retrieval rate. But if I have a snapshot where, here's a good example that we see with customers, I'm making a big change in a production system, and I've taken a snapshot, and maybe I want to be able to roll back to that, some point later in the future, or I've got to keep a pristine copy of this, for a very extended period of time. I can take that point in time and I can archive that off at a reduced cost. And maybe I don't need it, but I want to just take that point in time and basically store it at that, 75% savings rate. And the way the Snapshot Archive feature works is it basically takes that one slice of the lineage, creates a new full copy of that, and pushes that off to the Snapshot Archive tier. So you kind of take that incremental slice, reconstitute that as its own like full image, moves it to the archive class, and then does that at the discounted rate.
Yeah.
So it's important to think about what's actually happening there, creating that new full copy and moving that over to, the archive class, because that kind of defines what use cases it's really good for. So if we have just one image, just one single snapshot of the volume, good for those types of use cases. If I've got, maybe that copy for compliance, or if I've got, like a yearly incremental copy that I want to be able to archive, it's good for those use cases. And that's a good way to think about it versus like, being able to just sort of set the flag for everything in the lineage. It's really for taking like a single point in time that we have in archiving that.
Yeah. And so next week, like I said, not next week, in 2 weeks, we're going to have Venke on to come and talk a bit more about archive and like the in-depth, more kind of heavy stuff with it. And this blog post gives you a bit of a summary of that, so you can check that out. And it also has links to all this information. So I wanted to kind of shout that out. So when it comes to creating them, we were just talking before about when we see customers use data lifecycle management. Do you want to explain a bit about what that is, and so how it can help customers deal with their snapshots?
Yeah, exactly. And data lifecycle manager is going to let us define schedules for taking the snapshots we have. And the nice part about this is that we can stagger the schedules to have different retention. Right. So here's an example of something we've done with customers to help them realize some savings with snapshots. They may have a requirement to roll back their EBS volumes 30 days, but they don't need a daily copy of that. They don't need to pick right. every single day within the past 30 days to do it. They may need to just roll back to the start of the month. So what Data Lifecycle Manager lets us do is define what those multiple retention policies are, so that I can have 7 days of daily snapshots. So I've got a lot of granularity to roll back. But if I need to roll back 30 days, it's going to keep either a weekly or a monthly snapshot in there. This might be something folks are familiar with from like the backup world, if they were using a lot of backup tools for backing up like production systems. Very similar to that, where maybe the organization even has like a defined policy for what that retention schedule is, so that right. It makes that a little bit easier for defining that schedule.
I think that's unique. Well, I assume unique to kind of every business. Well, not every business. There are probably some standard ones. I think I was on a call with a customer. We were actually talking about lifecycle policies in S3 and getting rid of like multi-part uploads and things like that. Different subject, but they were like, "Oh, how many days?" And I was like, 90 or 30. And I just default said these numbers. I don't know where I know these numbers from. I think I've just picked them up from talking to people, but they seem to be very common ones. Sometimes you have ones that are many years, and that's kind of a compliance. I don't know why I'd air quote, but you know what I mean, a compliance thing. But yeah, I think so. Check if you're going to set up these policies, check with your business what you're supposed to be keeping.
Exactly. And I think in that case with, compliance in particular, if there's a compliance requirement to keep, 90 days worth of, or roll back to 90 days prior, that doesn't necessarily mean you need 90 days of daily snapshots to roll back. Mm-hmm. You could have that snapshot from, monthly copies, and that's going to be a much more cost-effective way to meet that compliance requirement. And you could set all that up automatically with DLM.
Yeah, and someone's agreeing in the chat. It's a good question to determine that retention. I think it's especially with you have different ones for different levels of an account. So if you have a production workload, you might need to keep that stuff longer, or you might need to be more frequent on how you're taking snapshots if you need to roll back. I know that when I was and this is thinking back now to when we were managing our Jira instance, and we would do like a backup before we did an upgrade. We would always do it, and someone would go in and take like a manual snapshot that would be totally separate. And so that was useful. But then the problem we had with that was just sitting there forever, and no one ever deleted it, even though it would be like, oh, June 2015, we've done a snapshot. Do you think we need that anymore? And it's like, probably not.
Well,
so
no, I was going to say maybe the other part of bringing this magazine from 1991 is that example too, where you take a snapshot because you're kind of worried that you might need to roll back to it. 30 days goes by, 6 months goes by. You're comfortable with where you are now. You don't need that, but now you've kind of moved on, and you have those pieces that are still hanging around for a long time. And, you can go through and catch some of that stuff to realize some savings.
Yeah, and it's that compound thing, isn't it, that we talk about a lot in here. It's the compound spend. So maybe only, 5 gigabytes changed on your volume. It's not going to add up to a lot of money. But if you do that every time, if it's daily and it's kind of spread across many accounts, if your entire environment is doing this, it is that compound spend over time. So moving on to that, how do we start to make this kind of challenge that customers have with finding ways to optimize simple? How do you kind of target your approach?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one of the most helpful tools is the one that you created, Steph, right? That the data collector tool, right? And what's really cool about this is just seeing and visualizing the snapshots that are based on point in time and based on the history of that. So sometimes we look at like a bill and we can see, what percentage of the cost or what the monthly cost is for snapshots, but we can't see how far back it goes. So I just want to give a shout out to this well-architected lab that you published that helps to pull out the metadata for those snapshots. And we've seen folks do a lot of interesting things with this where they could take that and just put that into, basically like a time series view, use a tool like QuickSight or even Excel, and basically say, oh, my snapshots go back this far. Maybe there's a lot of them that are from, 4 years ago. I can just look at those specifically to figure out what's going on. Or I can look at that lineage of snapshots that I have, and I can notice that, they aren't rolling off after 30 days. They're just kind of continuing to build indefinitely. And that's probably a sign that I can revisit that retention policy and make that a little bit more efficient.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's that, and some of the basis for this lab came from some stuff I did at my previous company. And I think a lot of customers have this where it's getting that holistic view, or your organization view could be quite tricky, because you can go into Amazon console and go into EC2, look at snapshots. You can see a list of snapshots, but trying to relate that back to other information, seeing if this is something that's spread across which account you might see snapshot spend in your CUR, or when you look at in Cost Explorer as quite high, like drilling into that, you can see what account it is, but maybe you want to find out a bit more, like what snapshot is it relating to, what EBS volume this is coming from constantly, is something to do with AMIs, where is it, what's driving this spend?
We had a meeting with a customer recently where we did that exactly what I had mentioned. We used your tool, we pulled out that list of all the snapshots, we visualized it, and we could see that, a couple of years ago, there was this one day where there was just a huge spike, hundreds of terabytes worth of data that was kept there. And we asked the customer, said, hey, we noticed this one point in time, it looked like maybe this was an ad hoc snapshot. And customer said, I remember that day. I remember that day very well. He said, we had a big problem, and we took a snapshot to capture the point in time so that we could then go through and do like an RCA on it. And that time had come and gone, and they had forgotten that they were carrying these hundreds of snapshots. And talking about your point around the compounding, they're still just paying for that every month till they go through and kind of catch those pieces and can go through and do the cleanup. So a couple different things that work well for customers, I think, is don't need to look at every snapshot that you have within the whole organization. You might be able to look at, some of the areas where there is more snapshot usage. You just look for those patterns and then say, oh, this is a place where we haven't really carried over what those business standards are, and we want to put that as a standard for like a retention policy and just kind of push that out. Or we've noticed that it makes sense to, on a quarterly basis or semi-annually, go through and look at some of the largest snapshots, the most expensive ones we have, and just say, do we still need this? And those tend to work pretty well.
Yeah, kind of targeted approach like that. We've got a question I'm going to throw up on the screen from Daily Push. Do you see a snapshot move to cold storage and then being dropped off much?
Yeah, and let me know if I'm reading this this question correctly. I mean, we want to recommend strategies to customers that I think let them feel confident with addressing the old snapshots without feeling like they're deleting something that they won't get back again. And sometimes our customers are asking for that guidance, like what's a good step for me to do this? And they could take the snapshots, they can archive them if they think that they don't need those, but they're not certain if it's ready to be deleted. And then after the 90 days, if no one's reclaimed this, no one's restored the snapshot, that might be the point where they can go through and delete it. And we also introduced in the recycling bin back in December of last year, and that applies to both the archive snapshots as well as the normal snapshots. What that lets you do is kind of put those snapshots in like a holding area, just before they actually roll off and get deleted. And that gives you sort of the belts and suspenders, so that you're not just deleting the snapshot, you're putting it in this temporary staging space. You can validate that nobody actually needs it, and then you feel more confident with being able to delete it and reclaim the capacity.
I was going to bring that up next, you read my mind. The new recycling bin. I think that's that the fact that we're giving customers a place to put things, and especially for people who are doing the cleanup operations. So I'm thinking again, as myself as a customer, when I was doing an exercise where I was like, we're spending a lot on snapshots, we have like tons of them, I'm going to go and delete a lot. And everyone was like, oh, is that okay? And then I was like, guys, these were made like 5 years ago. And I'm not exaggerating, some of them were made like 5 years ago. And I was like, I'm sure it'll be fine. The fact that I can now say, okay, let me go put it in here for a month. If we need it, we can get it. If we don't, we probably don't need it. And so the fact that there's exactly that kind of holding bin, I think is really cool. And the cost for a recycling bin that's just been asked, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and I can't. It will be on, I wonder if I can pull it up. Oh, it's a blog post. I can see if I can find pricing. Let's see. Pricing. The usual price. Okay, they're just the usual price. That's good. There we go. Quick Googling that. So they're the same price as normal snapshots, but they kind of can be moved off, I think. But yeah, check out the blog post that I've shared. I'll pop up on the screen again as a resource.
And the neat part there too is that you can adjust out retention too. So if you want to make it longer, you can make it longer. If you want to make it a little shorter, you can make it shorter.
And you can use tags, which I think is pretty cool. So you can say like, that this one's a dev environment because you've tagged it. Guys, don't forget your tags. Just shut up. Then you can use that. Now, I would be remiss if we haven't talked about this yet, and I hope we haven't talked about it, and I just haven't missed it. AMIs with relation to Snapshot. Now, this is, I think, the coolest part of the data collector thing that John taught me was the connection between AMIs and snapshots and how you can find like a big saving with these. Do you want to walk the guys through what this optimization kind of potential is?
Sure. Yeah. So we talked about a couple of ways people take snapshots. They could have, DLM policies that are going through and automating that for them. They could take an ad hoc snapshot if they're doing something like that example where they're trying to do like an RCA on, a problem that happened. They just log in, take a snapshot of a group of volumes. Sometimes the snapshot creation process is happening behind the scenes as part of something else. And that's the case with the AMIs. So someone's creating a machine image, basically templatizing, a workload that's running today. When they go through and do that, two things happen. It creates a snapshot, and then it also creates the AMI kind of identity itself, which is the metadata that describes the system. And these two pieces work together to let you deploy that workload and deploy that machine image for the future. What can happen sometimes is someone goes through and deregisters the AMI, and the snapshot will persist. Right. So we can't delete the snapshot if the AMI is registered. But once that AMI is deregistered, we want to go through and clean up the snapshot as well. So part of that data collection lab will look at any of the snapshots that are created as part of the AMI creation process. It's actually added in the description. You can see if that snapshot was used for an AMI. And if it was, and that AMI no longer exists, we can go through and usually be pretty confident that the use case for that snapshot is kind of no longer relevant, and that lab will do the heavy lifting for you. So it'll reconcile all the data back, and that could be an easy one to go through and just kind of do a quick sweep and find some opportunities to save.
And one of my customers now, as always, my customers are never as big as John's. So the numbers that I have are sometimes a bit smaller. But one of my customers, when I looked at this data, again, it was that compound thing where they had, I think it was $1,000 a month that they seemed to be like the snapshot percent of the amount of snapshots that they had, that they were spending about $1,000 a month, the ones that we could see were connected to AMIs that have been released. And so for them, for some people, $1,000 a month might not be a huge amount proportionally of the bill. And again, maybe in a year's time it's not, but it's that compound spend. That's $12,000 that you could maybe spend on like a really old magazine that's like a relic now that that's some money. You never know, but you could spend it on something maybe that is a bit more useful and can just like look good. So it is that we're hitting that low hanging fruit. And with this, I need to make sure this is correct. So John, Daily Pusher said, doing well with only 1K. Yeah, there are people who are, John, I'm sure has seen are a lot less than 1,000. But so going back to the AMI creation. So especially if you're spinning up an EC2 that installs loads of stuff, like you're using, I don't know, Packer or something to build the EC2, you take the snapshot and for the AMI, you then get rid of the EC2 and the EBS volume. So it won't be part of the lineage, right? It's just going to be a single snapshot every time if you do it that process.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why the savings opportunity can be fairly large in those. If those volumes didn't have any other snapshots and the only snapshot was that AMI creation process, it's a full copy of the volume. I mean, it's half the price of the normal general purpose SSD, but it's potentially, a full one. And if we've got, volumes that have or workloads that have multiple EBS volumes attached, sometimes you'll find those opportunities, database, there's something going on there where there's multiple volumes that, potentially, fairly large in size, and it can be a good way to go through and reclaim some of that cost.
Yeah. And also so that's just a key thing, because I think that's where I really hit home for me when I was like, oh, especially if you're using a service to spin up an EC2 and take it down, then you're not just creating images off of EC2s you're running all the time, because that's part of a lineage. This separation, I think, was I was like, oh, that makes sense. And what was I going to say? So the other thing with that, just taking a step out of the snapshot world into AMI, if you are constantly building, say I'm using Packer as an example because it's the only one I remember. You're using Packer, you're trying to get things installed onto your EC2. You're testing and testing. Maybe you're developing, maybe you've got people who are new who are making stuff. They're spinning up a lot of AMIs constantly, and then they're not using them. So there's the things that I remember doing this when we would be like testing stuff, deploying it, be like, oh, it didn't work as well. Okay, let's create a new one. Let's create a new one. Let's create a new one. We probably made hundreds of AMIs with snapshots that we didn't use, that are just sitting kind of that just kind of got left, and we just kept renaming them and put a new date. So we knew it was the latest version, was like gold, whatever, but people might not have cleaned up the leftovers. So if you're seeing, and in that lab, you can see the split that are AMI attached, AMI released, and not AMI. If you have a massive amount of spend on your AMIs and you're like, I only have like a 3-tier architecture, why have I got thousands of dollars spent on snapshots related to AMIs, and you only ever use one gold image, maybe go and check those out as well as a second level. So
this is my merch suggestion, Steph, is I think that one of my favorite lines you use all the time is, do I need this, right? And I want that, on the coffee mug for the Twitch show.
Oh my God. Somebody get me that.
we see that all the time too. And we had a conversation with a customer recently that was really similar to that. They looked back at all the snapshots they were taking. They realized a lot of the workloads they had, like the boot volumes for all those systems, were part of a templatized provisioning process. So there's no change that's happening there. If they redeploy the workload and they want to restore something, they just redeploy the AMI. And then they go through and they just attach the snapshots that any of those like additional volumes on it. So what they did was they changed the snapshot policies to basically say, hey, don't snapshot the boot volumes, just the other ones. And that I think just asking that question, right? Do we need this when we look at, all those pieces is a great way to, kind of look critically at that and find out, how to do things a little bit better.
Definitely. Good call on the boot volume. So we've got literally 2 minutes left. Anything else you want to share or talk about really quickly to summarize?
Well, I think we talked about a lot of different aspects of this, and one thing that just helps a lot of folks out is just getting your hands dirty a little bit, going through, creating lots of different snapshots, maybe putting some different workloads on top of those, introducing changes, running those scripts to find out like, hey, how does this impact the cost? And then maybe when I delete this snapshot, does this give me the savings that I was expecting? Or, part of the lineage, is that maybe changing what actually is realized for the savings? I think that those exercises are always good ones when we're dealing with some of these, like, sort of abstract concepts. just good to see how things work in the real world from a couple different angles.
Yeah, get your hands dirty. Everyone go and look at your snapshots, I think, and check out my lab, obviously. Okay, so thank you so much for joining, John. In 2 weeks, we'll be doing another snapshot episode, so check that out. And next week, we're doing the new cost profiler. We have some of the CFM guys coming on to chat about that. Also, I am going to be at the London Summit talking. So if anybody UK or kind of Europe close who is coming and you watch the show, come say hi, come see my talk. Just doing myself a little plug there. But yeah, thanks, John, and see you guys on next.